My preaching professor would be bemoaning the inelegance of the green water bottle up on the front of the stage with everything else, but sinus infections, what are you going to do? If I start choking on myself in the middle of the sermon, one of y'all will jump up and finish for me? Is that okay? Two news stories caught my attention this week as I was prepping for this week. You might have read at least one of them or seen it come across your feeds. One has to do with the Gray boys, 17 and 19, from one of the tribes here in New Mexico. They had a dream of going to Colorado State University, and so they saved up all the money they could and jumped in the one family car, and they made this 7-hour trip from New Mexico up to Colorado Springs this past week. And of course, because it's a long trip, they didn't quite make the tour on time, and they joined it a little late. And being native sons, they didn't look quite like everybody else on the tour, and that made one of the helicopter mothers nervous. So she called the campus police. They're here late. They won't tell me what they're doing here. I think they're Hispanic. I think one of them said they're from Mexico. I don't understand the symbols on their very dark clothing. I feel sick about this. I'm really sorry. I feel sick, she said. And so the campus cops came and responded to the call and questioned the boys, who didn't answer the question about what they were doing there. One, because they were a little shy, and two, because they didn't really owe anybody any justification for what they were doing there in the first place. I could probably end the sermon right there and just say the point of this whole thing is nobody owes you any justification for their existence, but that's not the point I'm trying to make today. By the time the cops had finished with the Gray boys, the tour had moved on. They were lost. They didn't know how to rejoin it. So they got in their car and made the 7-hour trip back home to New Mexico. I wonder if they're still dreaming about going to Colorado State now. The president of Colorado State is none too happy about the situation, that's for sure. But that put me in mind of another story I read earlier this week. And you're going to say, what do these two things have to do with one another when I tell you the other story, and I'll get there. Angie Montgomery is a homeowner in Albuquerque who came home from work one day to discover that her homeowners association had uprooted her backyard fence. Somewhere along the line, it was decided that the fence that she had built with permission and legally in her association was no longer legal and was an eyesore and didn't belong there. And so they just came in the middle of the day while she was off at work and stole her fence. Took it clear away, because homeowners associations apparently have that power, although that is questionable. Part of the story at KOB was about how homeowners associations behave a little too extra legally of late, kind of like shadow governments, exercising power willy-nilly and with a little bit of petty tyranny on top of it. And you're going to say, John, what do those two things have to do with one another? Because an incident of racial prejudice and profiling is one thing, and homeowners association squabbles are another thing entirely. On the spectrum of injustice, they are probably about as far apart as you could possibly draw them. And I'm going to say, yes, you're right. And on the other hand, yet, because contrarianism is a UU superpower, I can draw the connection between the two things. And it is simply this. These are two prime examples, as disparate as they are in the sense of injustice, about how screwed up we are as a people in our interpretation of what it means to be part of a community. On the one hand, the racial profiling and the injustice, people who looked like they didn't belong to someone in that group that day, someone trying to play gatekeeper for their own child's experience, someone encountering what they did not understand, what they saw as unusual, and responding with suspicion, drawing the walls around her particular tribe in this instance. And on the other hand, a homeowners association, which if we delve into the history, we know in the 60s we're given rise because people wanted to make sure that those people didn't move into our communities, and look at what they have become. Enforcing very shallow standards of what neighborhood should look like, while at the same time driving a wedge between actual human relationships in the neighborhood. A community of surface prettiness, a community that should look homogeneous to someone's mind. Neither of those things really a sense of community at all. And it's an understandable development. It's kind of a natural pathway to a human sin, because we're finite creatures, and at the same time, we desperately want to know that we belong to something. Somewhere deep down in the glowing spark of our soul, we know that we belong to one another without limits, and yet being the finite creatures that we are, and being the egotistical creatures we are, we think we can control exactly the level of that relationship and that belonging that we can have. I want to belong, but not too much belonging, please. I can only handle so many people. Maybe just my family. Maybe that is the belonging, but no, they drive me a little nuts. I need a few more people to belong to. So maybe everybody who speaks the same language that I do, but that's a lot of people. Let's narrow that a little bit. Maybe just the people who speak the same language that I do, who live inside the same geographical borders that I do, and that's still a lot of people. So maybe those, but let's draw it around people who worship God the same way that I do, who love the same way that I do. Maybe who have the same skin color that I do, or the same education that I do. We draw that boundary of belonging more and more narrow and narrower and narrower. Judgment aside, this is a natural thing for people to do. We are finite creatures. We can only deal with so many people. But the trouble we get into is when we mistake those boundaries for the limits of everything. Unitarian Universalist theologian James Luther Adams said that the two great human desires are for intimacy and ultimacy. Intimacy, to know that we belong to some group, to know that we can have a connection with at least one person, to know them and to be known for who we are. We need that for the care of our own souls. But we also need ultimacy, to know that we are part of something bigger, to understand that the world does not revolve around us, that we are not the center of the universe. And we get into trouble when we get too invested in the intimacy and mistake that for the ultimacy. Maybe I'm not the center of the universe, but my family is. My church is. We still draw the bounds. Our desire to belong clashes with our need for control and takes us down a path of separation in the process. But the thing is, we're not truly separate creatures. Again, deep down in that glowing spark at the center of our soul, we know we belong to one another in a boundless way. We are interconnected. We are interdependent, as our seventh principle says. And I have a funny feeling, for most of you at least, If you are here this morning, it's because you're feeling some sense of that call, some sense of that need to move beyond the boundaries of those small tribes, those small communities, those places that are walled in, to get some deeper sense of what it really means to be interdependent, interconnected, to see that level of connection in its wholeness. And if the church is doing its job correctly, that is the work we are trying to do together, to open the doorways, to give new lenses, to give you a chance to see that fullness of connection, to see what it means to be fully interconnected in all of its wholeness. The problem is, again, we're finite, limited creatures. We cannot see the infinite. We can only guess at its existence and guess at what it looks like, and we don't have a full picture of what the final assembled product of a whole interdependence might look like, of what complete interconnection might look like. We have to take it on faith that it's possible. We have to trust that we're moving in the right direction. There are no instructions for this. There are some scriptures out there for sure, but again, they were written by finite human hands, and you've got to be really good at reading between the lines and not just what's in the lines to try to get a glimpse of maybe what the instructions are. But you can't go to IKEA and pick up a flat pack that says interconnection, or however you say that in Swedish, and have all the parts and detailed pictograms and little blister packs with all the tools. It's just not out there. We're making this up as we go along. We have to guess and move forward in faith. And so we need some sort of compelling story, some sort of defining myth, to at least try to point us in the right direction, to try to give us a sense, even if it's in very, very soft focus, what this true sense of an interconnected community might look like. Some of us might say here, we are all made of the same stardust, which is absolutely true, and missing many, many steps in order to get us that picture of what that means for our interconnectedness, but it gives us a sense of that belonging. Christians might say, we are coming together to build the kingdom of heaven on earth. That's what we are here to do, which again, sounds like a lovely picture, but we don't have all the instructions to get there. Or your pastor might tell you there is a great heart at the center of everything that binds us in threads of love, which again is a lovely picture, and I'm going to keep using that now. You're going to get bored with it. But it's a soft focus image. What if we could have something a little more concrete? What if we could say we were here to build the beloved community? It's one of those great liberal religious buzzwords that you hear so frequently it starts to lose its meaning, starts to become another one of those soft focus images. It was coined at the turn of the last century by a theologian and philosopher named Josiah Royce, who was a member of a network of Christian pacifists called the Fellowship of Reconciliation. And beloved community to him was the natural endpoint of living a truly Christian life would mean, looking at the way that the early church gathered itself together and the way they took care of one another, that if we were, and these were his words, loyal to one another in that way, and loyalty in that way was a big thing for him, the natural endpoint would finally be a beloved community where we just took care of each other. Which again is a fantastic picture, a fantastic, like a puzzle box where you see what the finished product looks like, but none of the pieces look right in the box. That's what Royce is giving us with this sense of beloved community. For him, that beloved community was almost strictly an eschatological idea, something about the end times. At the end of time, we would have beloved community. That's what he said. Funny enough, another member of the Fellowship of Reconciliation who came a little after Josiah Royce was a young pastor by the name of Martin Luther King Jr., who loved this idea of beloved community and honestly believed that it was not just something that would come at the end of time if we lived the right way. He saw it as something practical and possible and imminent in our world right now. And the whole of King's life was based on this idea that we could build a beloved community here and now, despite our limited selves, despite our imperfections, despite our propensity for hurting one another over and over and over again. Because reconciliation was such a big part of his theology, we could come back to the table and try again and again and again to forgive one another, to build a more just world, to do it here and now. And now maybe we can start to write that instruction manual. What does it look like to build a beloved community? Ask any of our youth who have gone on our Mexico mission over the last 7 years along with the United Church. Ask any of the youth or adults who have gone on that mission over the last 30 years plus. And they'll tell you about literally building community, laying out concrete slabs and knocking together wall sections and covering them in stucco and putting a roof on the top, making buildings for a community deeply in need. But in the process of that trip, as our youth and our adults experience what goes on, they are experiencing too the steps of building a beloved community. Crossing borders not normally crossed, literally and figuratively. Crossing a national border, but getting out of the walled-off home of their comfort zone, of whatever station of wealth they might have, of whatever language they might speak, of whatever culture they are so ingrained in, they cannot see it as anything else but the norm. To experience something new, to experience another tribe, and have a chance to respond to it not with suspicion, but with curiosity and generosity. To give a gift freely, not just the free home they are physically being given, but the gift of their time, that week of spring break that they so desperately need. To put that much physical labor into it, the gift of their sweat and their muscle and their heart and their burgeoning humility. To form bonds that they might not know existed before that moment. In the process, we return from this trip beginning to reconceive what it means to be part of a neighborhood and an association. Not some shadowy organization creating Stepford neighborhoods with no fences and grass that is only 0.2 millimeters high or whatever the rule is right now. But a neighborhood that encompasses all, and an association of people that embraces all ultimately. This is very small-scale stuff. It is certainly not the completion of the work at all, but it gives us a glimpse of what it might mean to follow the steps into building that beloved community, that community where we finally have a sense of just how deeply we are connected to everyone, every being. To be able to cross those boundaries and be able to view another tribe not with suspicion, but with curiosity, and maybe even some compassion, and to have those encounters in such a way where commonalities come into the fore, to the point where our differences become not barriers, but a cause for celebration with one another. And in that celebration, coming to learn that it is possible to love unconditionally, regardless of who is in or out of whatever tribe we may think it is we belong to. And realize finally that we are entrusted to one another's care. We are our brothers and sisters' keepers. And delving into that sense of love, we move into a place of commitment. Justice is love carried out in public, and so that is what we work for, giving of ourselves. Not doing justice because it is the right thing to do, but doing justice because it is what we have to do, because we have experienced the other as ourselves. And discovering at last that what we do in the name of that community does not wear us down, but brings us joy. Until we can at last remember what the Great Heart has been asking us to remember, that we belong to each other without limits, unconditionally. This might make the task look manageable. It might also feel like it's still too much. What could we possibly do? How could a week in Mexico possibly save the world and build that true beloved community? It's only 1 week. I'm only one person. And here's the deal. Every year we go back and we visit some of the sites that we built in the previous years, but as time goes on, we lose a bit of contact. We lose a bit of that direct connection, but the experience of those bonds, the memory of what we see in that connection carries forward with us, gives us a new lens to see all our connections, opens our eyes just a little wider, sharpens up that soft focus just a bit. Beloved community is built one person at a time, one connection at a time, one vision of connection at a time. And we will not finish it in our lifetime. And that is okay. Dr. King liked to quote the book of Deuteronomy as well, that says, "We drink from wells we did not build." We are building on the work that others have done before us. Others will build on the work that we have done. We are absolved this morning from having to complete the work. But we cannot give up the responsibility of at least trying to engage in it. Getting out of our comfort zones. Moving past the boundaries that we have set up randomly and arbitrarily for ourselves. To meet the other in a place of curiosity and joy. Until we can call the one we do not know beloved. Let go of the results, but invest in the practice. May it be so.